final speaker series presentation of the semester. Our series will reconvene next semester. Mark your calendars for February 12th, when we'll welcome Peter Gould, horse-drawn yogurt, to the farm, from the farm, and back again, my life in Vermont's rural utopia. So that'll be February 12th. But for tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome again Eric Bass, whom you know because he has been with us for the last week here at Landmark College with his incredible troupe of actors, working with us on a residency about refugees. So tonight he's going to talk about really the idea of using puppets in talking about social injustice. And so without further ado, let us please welcome Eric.
In the olden days, we tipped our hats. Now we just kind of tip our glasses. We have to do that anyway so we can see out the top of them. So this is, I was approached, I don't know, about 6 months ago or so by a journal of puppet theater in Poland. They asked me to write an article for them. And so I thought, well, okay, what would I write about? So I thought about what's important to me right now about puppet theater. And what's interesting to me these days is why puppet theater as an art form can address issues of social injustice in a way that's very specific to this art form, in a way that's different from other forms of theater, different from dance, different from painting. You know, that something about the art form is well positioned to talk about this theme. So I wrote the paper, and I will read it to you this evening. In between, as I read, there'll be five-minute video clips, so that you can get a break from me and see something really interesting. But this article is called "Colliding Worlds," or Puppet Theater Dramaturgy in a Time of Social Injustice. And if dramaturgy is an unfamiliar word to you, it has to do with the relationship between a piece of theater and how that piece of theater is made and the themes that piece of theater is about. In other words, it's about the relationship of an art form to its subject matter. So I start with a little quote from the playwright Bertolt Brecht, a German playwright, mostly from the 1930s into the 1950s. In these dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. Every age is a time of social injustice. That being said, the world today is in an acute state of polarization. To fail to see this is to live in a bubble. The wars in the Middle East, sparked by superpower intervention, and the waves of refugees. Oh, you're about to see my screensaver.
No.
The waves of refugees that are fleeing have touched every one of us and provided an excuse for xenophobia, racism, and violence. The climate crisis has pitted science against superstition in ways that evoke the rebirth of the Dark Ages. These crises have also brought the social and political divisions in many countries to critical explosive, and shocking pinnacles. In what way is the art of puppet theater suited to address this world? To begin with, when the puppet meets the actor, they are standing on two sides of a border. This border is, of course, metaphorical. It is a moment in which worlds collide. It is a moment of choice. We can choose to see ourselves in the puppet and learn something, or we can choose to reject this distortion of the human and lose part of ourselves. In this meeting, to our surprise, it is the puppet who most often embodies the greater humanity. In recent years, Sandglass Theater, that's our company, has looked at several pressing social issues through the lens of the puppet. Each of these projects has recognized the above proposition in a different way. By looking at 5 of these projects, we can explore some of the potential range of how puppets occupy a colliding world, and thereby directly confront the injustice that this collision engenders. Indeed, every injustice is a disenfranchisement of a segment of our population, a people, a world whose humanity we refuse to embrace. In each of these pieces, we have a starting point, which is to presume that we know nothing about our subject. This makes research necessary. What we know is our medium, puppet theater. We know both the humanity of the puppet and its otherness. We know how to animate the puppet, to give it breath. We know how to help it find footing in its environment and to witness its predicament. Most importantly, we know, or we have to learn, to see through its eyes. Everybody with me so far? This is some of the attributes of puppet theater. So what I'm going to do now is talk about each one of 5 pieces and then show you, as I talk about each one, then show you a clip from that piece. And see, as we put all of these 5 pieces together, we'll get 5, I think, quite different ways in which puppets address these issues and these kinds of issues. So in 2001, on an arts delegation to Cambodia, I met Man Kosal and his theater company, Savanapum. I was looking for a possible collaborator on a piece, still undetermined. Savanapum is a company that blends puppetry with music and dance, and in doing so, uses traditional arts in non-traditional ways. We approached each other carefully, building trust slowly. I went back in 2003 with some other performers from Sandglass Theater, and again in 2005. By this time, we had built the trust to create a piece together. Kosal picked the story, a Cambodian tale of war that he knew from his teachers. He had wanted to stage this story for many years, but it was when he and I sat down to talk, to merge our approaches to theater, that he felt for the first time that he had the means to do this story. The tale, in brief, is this. A soldier goes off to war. He leaves his wife and his dog at home. He is gone a long time. During his absence, his wife takes in a lodger, an old woman. As years go by, the husband does not return. The wife finally takes a lover, a very serious crime in the age and culture in which this story takes place. The old woman discovers the lovers together, whereupon, to save their own lives, the wife and her lover burn down the house, and the old woman dies in the fire. Sometime after that, the soldier returns home. He begins to travel from town to town, and by accident, he discovers his wife in a distant town washing the clothes of her lover. In court, she denies that he was her husband, but at that moment, the dog enters, recognizes both of them, and proves that they were one family. Although the crime of infidelity is serious, the lenient judge is about to forgive and reunite the husband and wife when the ghost of the old woman enters and decries her murder. The wife goes to jail, and the soldier and the dog go back to war. Now remember that this is in 2001, when we started this project. It's not that long after the genocide in Cambodia, right? War was still present in everyone who was there. This story has the potential of a melodrama, except for one thing: the war. If we see this story as one of many stories of how families are broken by war, of how morals are corrupted by war, of how in the face of war we betray our innate goodness, we have a much more relevant story. To do this, we have to give the wife a strong voice, as strong as the voice of her accusers. This already addresses injustice in Cambodian society, where women's voices are not as strong and not listened to as well. But what about the puppets? What about their world? We chose to divide the styles of puppets in order to define the worlds of the piece. Specifically, we have the human story, and we have the greater story that surrounds them, the story of war. We used Sandglass's style of figurative puppets for the soldier, the wife, the old woman, the lover, the dog. And if you saw Babylon, you saw what our puppets look like. We used the large, magnificent, traditional Cambodian shadow figures for the war itself. As shadows, they are the background of the story. And as shadows grow when they move closer to the light, these images of war could loom like clouds of war above and around our puppet characters. Cambodians dance their shadows, and so the dance of war set the rhythm of the piece. The images of the puppets themselves, figures from the Ramayana, the great epic, were also warlike. We used human dancers for the judge and for the sense of witnessing that this story required. In this way, the puppets made it possible for Kusal and for Sandglass to find the humanity of this story and to find the great shadow world that lifted this tale beyond the level of a domestic drama. So I'm going to show you 5 minutes from this piece. They're just little clips, and see if you can kind of see in these visuals some of these distinctions that I'm talking about. So this piece was called The Story of the Dog. No speaker?
It's good.
The speaker's there.
You hear that? It's good?
When a bird leaves its branch, when a bird leaves its branch, another bird takes its place. When someone leaves a house, when someone leaves a house, someone else takes his place.
There's the soldier. And here's the war. So this is the wife meets her lover.
Are these the bones of my wife?
He comes home, he finds the burnt down house and assumes his wife is dead.
Are these the ashes of her life? Was my husband just a dream? Is he alive or is he dead? Was he taken by the war, or did the life I had even exist?
All right, so that's a glimpse of the story of the dog. So you could see, I hope, that the main characters are the puppets. And the puppeteers, I mean, everybody's dressed in jungle green. We are their world. We are the war itself. And then you've got a glimpse of the shadows as well, the war that's looming behind the big screen that's always there, that gets bigger. So we had, I mean, we can talk later perhaps, but we had some interesting experiences with audiences in Cambodia, especially with that piece. I want to go on now to talk about a piece from 2012. And let's see how I get out of this and into something else. Thank you. Oh, good. So, oh, I know what I do. I do this, and then I do this. Ha-ha. Great. Okay, I'm going to come to this school so somebody can teach me how to do these things. Right, how do I make this one big again?
View.
View.
Enter full screen.
There.
Lovely. Great, it's black. Hopefully eventually something comes up. All right, so that was a project from 2001 to 2006, basically. These things take time. Part of what takes time is actually building a relationship in a collaboration. And part of what takes time is raising money for the project. So I'm going to jump to 2012. Sandglass, again, in 2012, did a collaboration, this time with the Białystok Puppet Theater in Poland. This is a project that was very personal to me. I had worked several times in Poland, and as a Jew, I had had to wrestle with my people's history there, specifically the lack of a conversation about Polish anti-Semitism in the 20th century, especially among puppeteers that I met. Nobody was talking about this. So when the theater director Marek Waszkiel asked me to write a Jewish piece for Białystok Theater, I could only offer one that addressed the 1968 expulsion of most of Poland's Jews. As a writer, I looked for a format that made this piece a piece for puppet theater, right? What's puppet about this? So two aspects of puppetry made this work for me. Transformation and memory. Two things that puppets do very well. I had been in Białystok 7 years earlier, and I had been struck by the remarkable presence of hundreds of large black birds in the Central Park, something like crows. For me, they were the spirits of the 50,000 Jews who died in the Białystok ghetto in 1941. They were dressed in black. They were cacophonous, like Hasidic men in a synagogue. So I wrote a piece in which a Jewish American dancer comes to Poland and is accosted by these birds. They trap her in the park, and then they transform into ghosts of a rabbi from 1906, the year of the pogrom against the Jews, a woman from the ghetto in 1941 during World War II, and the director of a puppet theater from 1968, the expulsion. Each of these ghosts tells her their story, and each engages her in a song, a dance, and emotion. So when she finally meets the young Polish dancer that she's come to work with, they have much more to talk about than she imagined. Even when we know history, we do not always know what our emotions will be when we confront it, when we relive it, when we engage with it. What interested me was finding a form for dialogue to help inspire a conversation that for me was not happening enough. As an American raised in the civil rights era, I feel that nothing really changes without a dialogue. Approaching this piece, I realized that I knew very little about the 1968 expulsion. I started looking for people, especially in the United States, who could tell me what they experienced, how they heard that they were being expelled, what they felt, what they left behind. I found a number of Polish Jews who had created new lives in the US after leaving Poland at that time. Their voices and stories are woven into the fabric of this piece, Blackbirds. But what is important here is how the puppet theater gives those voices a unique form. Puppet theater requires complicity with the audience in order to bring a puppet to life. Playing a puppet is like playing a game, one that the puppeteer and the audience play together. I had met a director of a Polish puppet theater back in 1982 who told me he was Jewish and that he would lose his job if that truth were revealed. And so my ghost of 1968 became a puppet theater director, and in my story, he directed a small puppet play about Janoszek, a Polish folk hero. This enabled the audience to enjoy the puppet playing with puppets, and it enabled my puppet director to contrast his own situation with that of the Polish folk hero in his play. He could also reach out from his own puppet stage and touch the young American woman to whom he was telling his story. She was his witness, a compassionate witness. It was her story, too, that he was telling. He demanded to be heard, and she, from her world of another time and place, complied. So here's 5 minutes. Says that Bialystok was Russia in 1906. This is a city that became different countries in different wars.
Dlaczego? Dlaczego tak się dzieje? Posłuchaj. Posłuchaj.
Again, we used a shadow world. This is the shadow of a bear that plays a very big role in this piece. And again, as in Story of the Dog, dance is very much part of the piece. Through this tango that the woman from the ghetto gets the American dancer to listen to her story. This is a tunnel under the ghetto, where
10
a
zł.
Jewish woman in the ghetto tries to buy bread from a Polish peasant woman from outside the
Mogę dać
ghetto.
ci 5. Ja na to 10. 5 i te buty. Są za duże. Ale to dla twojego męża. Mam ciemny chleb. Wezmę ciemny chleb.
Yes? Yannick? Yes, it's me. No, I'm still in the park. Parku. I know, I said I would walk toward you and meet you halfway, but I haven't left yet. Tutaj jestem ciągle. Something is happening. I can't explain. Coś się dzieje dziwnego. Why don't you come here? Chodź tutaj. Yes, to the park. What am I doing? I'm watching. The birds. The birds.
Tak to było w 1941. Widziałaś, wiesz, opowiedz historię o to, co zdarzyło się w 1941. Historia opowiedziana przez ptaki. 50 tysięcy odeszło w 1941. W murach tylko jednego getta. Nie urodziłaś się w 1941.
Powiedzą mi, panie Henryku, sprawa jest bardzo skomplikowana, albo panie Henryku, czy jest pan członkiem syjonistycznej piątej kolumny? A jeszcze tak niedawno, Jurku, oni nawet nie znali słowa syjonista.
Didn't mean maybe for you, for others they sing something else I don't know!
Okay, so that was a little bit of Blackbirds. I hit escape. And I go to the next one. Okay, everybody with me so far? Is this making sense? Also in 2012, Sandglass Theater worked on our own production, a piece called Degeneration, an Exaltation of Larks. It's a piece about people with dementia. We worked on this show for 4 years before it opened. We've been approached by an organization in New York that worked with circles of people with dementia using a storytelling process called time slips, created by the MacArthur Prize winner Anne Basting. They had hoped that we would create a puppet play from one of these stories written by people with late-stage dementia. Our response was that we liked the project, but then in order to understand the material we were working in, we had to collect the stories ourselves. The organization, PHI, trained our cast in facilitating time slip circles, and we ran 20 weeks of these storytelling events in nursing homes to gather the material for this piece. This was the longest and most extensive commitment to research that we had ever made. It enabled us to get not only the stories, but to get to know many people with dementia and to develop over time our own reactions to the people, the disease, and our own fears. We came to understand that many people are afraid not only of the disease, but of the people who have it, because they don't know what to do or say or feel embarrassed, or perhaps because people with dementia have become other. Understanding that puppets are always other to us, we knew we'd found a way to stage the show. We, the puppeteers, became nurses and caregivers to our cast of puppets, residents of a nursing home, all of whom had dementia, although each in an individual way. The piece became then not a piece about people with dementia, but about our relationship to them as caregivers. It became a piece about the difficulty and challenges of our work and about our own fears of becoming like our patients. This process could have led down a very dark and hopeless path, but our work was to create a piece that was actually uplifting, that gave strength to other caregivers. It is easy to be dark, especially in dark times, as Brecht would have said. I question whether this helps anyone. On the other hand, to give someone hope, realistic hope, is a task worth taking on. What Time Slips does over time is to help improve not the condition of dementia, which is irreversible, but the quality of life of both people with dementia and their caregivers. It does this by retraining caregivers to stay in the present when talking with dementia patients, and by accepting play as a form of discourse. So how did our production do this? By casting the residents with dementia as puppets, all of them in oversized wheelchairs made from crutches and baby buggies. We, the puppeteers and caregivers, towered over them, and yet they dominated us. It gave us room to move in and out of the story, to be part of the interaction of worlds, and also to step outside and comment on our experience. At one point in the show, we give people in the audience the puppets to hold, so that they can all watch a play within a play together. We demand that the audience take responsibility for these puppet characters, and they love it. We could not do this with actors. You can imagine putting an actor in somebody's sense. Okay. We could not put actors into the laps of the audience members. Using puppets, our metaphor is tactile. It's material. It might seem harmless, but the metaphor is not lost. It is about the care we take for others, for those we believe are outside our world. So, here's a little bit of degeneration.
Degeneration, an exaltation of larks, is about dementia. It is also about play, joy, and communication. It is based on stories written by circles of people with late-stage dementia, based on the story-making method called time slips. These stories and the process of collecting them form the blocks on which degeneration is built. Degeneration is about people with dementia and also about their caregivers. Dementia is frightening to us because it can happen to any of us, will happen to many of us. To look at anyone with dementia is to look at ourselves.
Lawrence, this soup is cold. It's supposed to be cold, Lawrence. It's gazpacho. Oh, fuck, gazpacho.
Starting with nothing. Right off the boat.
Tell me, where did he come from?
Yeah, something to drink now.
Well, how about we take a walk first? What do you say?
I'm thirsty.
Yeah, we'll just
I'm
take a little
thirsty.
stroll.
I want something to drink. I'm thirsty.
Where are you going, Melissa?
I'm thirsty. I want something to drink. I'm
No,
thirsty.
Ow! Shopping!
Bonjour, madame. Did I get you so
Ah, no.
Some
No.
No. So?
No.
Oh, Jenny. Spicy.
No.
Salad?
Ah, beautiful. Ah, there it is. Wonderful. The train has pulled out. It goes faster and faster, and you no longer can make out who's behind the window.
And then there's, what shall we call
I'm afraid of a disconnect, a fading away, an isolation, a paralysis in the face of the inevitable.
This is one of the dreams of one of our dementia residents.
And what shall we say will happen if he does not finish his work?
We'll go after him. Things will crumble away, one by one, with the prettiest ones going first.
Oh, I see the devil in the clouds.
And this is another dream.
It's all about fantasy, and often reoccurring. The simplest things become huge. We'll be in the middle of a session, and Mary will just give him a look. And for a brief moment, it's like the light goes up. Our eyes will meet. She'll smile, and I'll start giggling. Then she starts giggling. Pretty soon Elwood gets going. It really is the most incredible feeling.
So I've got just two more pieces to talk about and show you some video of, and then we can talk. 2015, the piece is called Nathan the Wise, or in Spanish, Nathan el Sabio, because we did this collaboration in El Salvador. Nathan el Sabio was a project that spanned 3 years, a collaboration with Teatro Luis Poma in El Salvador. The play itself was written by G.E. Lessing in Germany in 1799. It's a powerful Enlightenment epic about racism and religious intolerance in Jerusalem during the Third Crusade. I had proposed this project to Roberto Solomon, director of Teatro Luis Poma, for 3 reasons. First, we both love the piece for its story and theatricality. Second, it seemed to address aspects of the violence and religious tensions that plague Salvador today. And third, it seemed to lend itself to puppets in spite of its weighty text. Salvador is today a country under siege from gangs that are at war with each other, with the government, and with people on the street. Their main business is extortion, but they have profited from traffic in guns and drugs as well. These gangs began in the United States during the Salvadoran Civil War in the 1980s, during which many Salvadorans moved to the U.S., were challenged by gangs in U.S. cities, formed their own gangs to defend themselves, and then were deported back to El Salvador. As an American, it's hard not to feel some responsibility for this situation. In such a climate of violence, Nathan el Sabio was received as, quote, a mouthful of fresh air, unquote, by one of the critics. The characters in Nathan are all positioned to hate others, but by the end of the play, they have all rejected that hatred. Of course, the play had to be adapted. One of the ways we did that was to separate the characters into 2 worlds: those who move the action and those upon whom the action is moved. The 5 central characters, Nathan the Jew, his daughter Rhea, the Sultan Saladin, the Sultan's sister Sita, and the Knight Templar, are all carried by the forces around them, forces that seem to be driving them to their doom. These characters were played by puppets. Around them are characters that drive these intrigues: Rhea's nurse, Saladin's banker, the Christian patriarch, and a friar. These characters were played by actors who could push the puppets into paths that they, the human characters, had devised. It was a powerful distinction, one that gave the puppets a focus to help to break the melodrama inherent in the writing. To add further to this device, we costumed the puppeteers and actors as different members of Salvador's very rigid class system. The honest Templar was played by someone dressed as a gang member. The Sultan's noble sister by someone dressed as a maid. The Sultan himself as someone dressed in the fashion of today's Salvadoran politicians. The costumes suggested that people of different classes could come together, if only for an hour, and create a piece of art together. This, of course, cannot really happen, and that's the point. At the end of the play, they put down their puppets and go their separate ways. Here is Nathan el Sabio.
Nadie sabe dónde. Cuando le alto con su fuerte brazo. Frío, insensible ante los gritos de júbilo de nuestra latitud, tuvo que cruzar el Éufrates, el Tigris, el Jordán. ¿Cómo vamos a alegrarnos y alabar al buen Dios que lo trasladó a usted y a sus naves sobre las alas de su ángel invisible? El Dios que dio la señal a mi ángel para que visiblemente me llevara a través del fuego. No es más que un rumor.
No lo había visto. Por este movimiento sacrifiqué a mi reina.
¿Jugaste? Bueno, ahora me toca a mí. ¿Ay, qué? Por cuya mano suyos, el Dios por quien guerrea quiera regresarte de nuevo a la tierra para la que naciste. ¿Su Dios por quien guerrea? ¿Es propiedad de alguien, Dios?
Cuánta razón tenía Adán al decir, conócela y verás.
¿Quién ha dicho eso?
Su padre, él me dijo, conócela y verás. Por cierto, ¿dónde está ella? ¿Aún con Saladín? ¿Qué voy? Presiento un peligro.
¿Peligro de qué?
Peligro para usted. Para mí.
¿Cuál fe es la que te ha iluminado más?
Sultán, yo soy judío.
Y yo musulmán, y el cristiano está entre nosotros. De estas tres religiones solo una puede ser la verdadera. Hazme partícipe de tu entendimiento.
¿En qué estoy metido? ¿Qué quiere de mí el sultán? Esperaba que me pidiera dinero y resulta que quiere la verdad. La verdad. Y la quiere con canto insonante.
Claro que podría haber sido mi padre. Quizás sea yo un hijo del arroyo. Eso era de impedir y ahora del tuyo. Aunque bien sabemos que podríamos documentar tu árbol genealógico paso a paso hasta llegar a Abraham.
¿Me descuidó tanta amargura? Caballero, ¿acaso le he usado algo hasta ahora?
Perdóname.
No importa. Vamos. ¿Deprisa? Caballero, un doble secreto. Uno solo lo conozco yo, el otro lo conoce usted.
Comienza.
No, señor caballero, usted primero. No le que mandar, caballero, que mi secreto no podría servirle de nada, como antes no conozca yo el suyo. Si hubiese yo primero, usted no me habrá confiado nada, y mi secreto seguirá siendo mi secreto, y usted perderá el suyo. Pero basta, confiese que la amas a la locura.
Un templario amado a la judía.
¿Quién es? Suena absurdo, pero de cuando en cuando hay un asunto, más de lo que sospechamos. Esta es la tierra de los milagros.
Habría que ejecutar al judío. Es el castigo que establece en el derecho papal y imperial para tal crimen, para tal depravación. De modo que, y por cierto, la misma ley manda a la hoguera a una muchacha judía que seduce a un cristiano, a morir por el fuego. Veo y encuentro a una joven maravillosa. Imbécil que soy. Me lanzo nuevamente a las llamas. Intento conquistarla. Soy rechazado. El prudente padre no me desestima directamente. Indaga. Pide informes.
¿Querrá acaso obligarte a que te conviertas al judaísmo?
¿Quién sabe?
Lo sabe. ¿Quién mejor conoce a Adán?
La superstición en la que hemos sido criados no pierde su poder sobre nosotros. No son libres todos los que se ríen de sus cadenas, sultán. Y si resultara que ese parangón fuera uno de estos judíos que buscan niños cristianos para educarlos en su fe.
¿Quién dice eso sobre él?
Ella es una niña cristiana raptada.
En eso descabalgaste, me entregaste la criatura envuelta en tu capa. La llevé a mi pecho, la besé, me eché de rodillas y supuse, Dios mío, de 7 vuelvo a tener una.
Eres un cristiano.
Jamás hubo mejor cristiano que tú.
El cielo nos proteja. Lo que me hace cristiano a tus ojos, me hace judío a los míos.
And finally, I want to talk about Babylon, the show that we've been doing this week. Sandglass is at work on a new production about refugees. I wrote this a while ago. We are doing that production. An issue affecting everyone in the Middle East, Europe, and North America. The show is called Babylon, after the fallen kingdom that once existed about 60 miles from what is now Baghdad. It is a piece about dehumanization and, of course, its corollary, humanization. Once again, the puppet is our medium. As in the productions I've talked about, the refugees in this piece are seen as other. There are reasons for exploring this theme with puppets. We've come to view puppets as containers of stories, objects that are there to be looked into until they reveal what they carry inside. We began our work on Babylon by interviewing refugees. We did this with help from the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program, and this process alone was a long and delicate one. To be a refugee is to live with trauma, and part of our work was to build the trust that allowed refugees to speak with us and not rekindle that trauma. Knowing the story of a puppet's character does not mean that the puppet can speak it. One of the dramaturgical choices in puppetry is finding out how the puppet's voice is heard. Not all puppets speak. This is most artfully represented in the Japanese Bunraku theater, in which the offstage narrator speaks or sings the voices for all of the puppets on stage. Refugees' voices, too, need to be found and heard. We are separated from their voices by language, distance, danger, culture, to name just a few obstacles to hearing their stories. In Babylon, we turned the refugees' stories into songs that are sung by the entire ensemble of puppeteers, singers. In doing so, we take responsibility for getting their stories heard. We do so in the presence of the puppets so that they can approve. And then we allow the puppeteers to speak to the audience about what these stories mean to them personally. We also contextualize these voices with other testimonies by the actors of arguments for and against resettlement of refugees. The dramaturgy of the puppet in an age of social injustice is a dramaturgy of complicity. It is a complicity to open discourse. And the puppet lends itself to this because it comes to life through an act of complicity between the puppeteer and the audience. So here's the last video.
Once a refugee woman called me her daughter. She tied me to her story, involved me. In that instant, the helplessness of injustice throbbed through me, and I wondered what difference a small piece of puppet theater can make in the enormity of it all. These are the tools I have. Images, songs, stories.
elsewhere, and that now goes back to our own beach. his camps.
I imagine.
All the land is war. Brothers in one camp, others singing no more. They meet by chance as they search and run, as they blow away.
Sustain me, blessed Virgin.
Sustain me. Sustain me, Holy Mother. Oh, we cannot call our lives our own. The clothes we wear are clothes we've sewn.
For another land.
For another land, sent back to us second-hand.
Down there in Texas where I used to live, it's horrible. There are snakes everywhere, and some of them are so little they go right into your door and into your house. And those little ones are just as poisonous as the big ones.
Holy Mother.
There is war in my country.
Why are you mumbling? Are you a Muslim? What are you saying? What are you saying?
It is not for gain that we forsake our land. 'Tis not for profit we cleave our love, placing your merciful hand to face darkness and storms on this sea.
Suspended between two nations on earth, no one wants a Syrian.
Do you have a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group? If not, you do not qualify as a potential refugee.
These stories won't affect the lives of people who are fleeing danger. But can they affect ours? They're more than just puppets, aren't they?
So, in closing, we hold the puppet in our hands. How do we treat it? With delicacy? With force? Do we insist on having our way with it? Or do we support it and wait to see where it leads us? Do we observe it in a static state, like an image frozen in the ice, or do we close it up in a box, something we hope to forget about? Or sometimes we'll take it with us to our next port of call. The way we treat the puppet is what our performance is about, no matter what we say. It remains in a world separate from us and other. How we define that world and how we engage with it is our statement. It may be a spirit that overshadows us or a microcosm we examine. It might invade our world, or we might bring it gifts. In the myriad of possibilities it presents, each contains the possibility of justice or of violation, of inclusion or of expulsion. An encounter with the world of the puppet is a collision.
Okay.
So that's the first time I've given this as a talk and not as a piece of writing. So I'm of course curious how it works, but also I'm curious about your own, whether the things I was talking about are actually well illustrated here, and I'm just, was it interesting? I don't know.
It was interesting. It was really interesting.
I've been talking for an hour. Anybody else want to talk?
Well, maybe I can start. There's one line in Babylon that really disturbed me, and you didn't excerpt it in this, and it was people will feel more for these puppet stories than they will for the actual refugees. And it felt to me like that was kind of a betrayal of the work that you do and the work that you presented to us tonight. That the subtext of that is mere puppet stories, and yet you've talked to us about this pedagogy in which the puppet becomes enlivened, if you will, almost incarnate, a way of, what did you say? You said it was a vessel, right? A container of story.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about that apparent disconnect. Is it in my misunderstanding, or what is it that's happening at that moment?
Yeah.
I'd comment on that.
Sure.
Because it's something that I fought with a lot, and it's actually interesting because in this promo that you see here,
Right.
there's a part of text that isn't in the show anymore.
Right.
Which was my own battle with, shouldn't I probably be, if this matters to me, should I be out giving water and blankets to people on the shore? And what am I doing here making a puppet theater piece about this? And I really fought with that for a while. And that's really changed for me in understanding what it is to bring dialogue into places where it's not happening, and what it is to offer hope, and why I do the work that I do. Not just because it's the tools I have and what I do, but because I truly, it's come around to a place of really believing in its vitality.
Yeah, and that's what I feel in the work that you do in all of the pieces that you've put up here, and why it seems so jarring to have this one line that says that somehow in my mind calls into question all that you're doing.
But I think it's not quite the same as, but it's in the realm of discussion. I can't remember who said this, and it probably was a decade ago, but somebody was describing the United States as a place that thinks that our superhero movies are real, but we want our newscasts to be more like fiction and entertainment. Mm-hmm. That there's something inverted in our relationship to the media. I don't feel it's a betrayal when Caleb in the show says that we are connected more, with these puppet stories than we are with the stories of refugees. I think it's true, the refugees, and unless there's somebody, it's hard to get to know a person, right? And it's dangerous to get to know a person, and it's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for you, and especially if they're going to tell you things that are going to make them and you really uncomfortable, and you're not going to know what to say. You're going to be sorry you asked. We don't have this problem with puppets. Okay, so.
I think what makes it easier to relate to your puppets versus other puppets is they're so human-like. There are some puppets that Britain Puppet makes that, because of the giant scale, you can't always relate them as real people.
Howard.
Babylon. As a fan who has some familiarity with Sandglass Theater's work, it seems to me that Babylon is a breakthrough because it is not puppet theater, it is theater, pure and simple, in which there is a cast of people and puppets. And what I'm curious about is it such a breakthrough for you too?
Yes, it is, but Degeneration was also a breakthrough, and I think each of these pieces was a breakthrough. We'll see how many more breakthroughs I have in me, in this life. But but I feel Babylon is very, very much a piece of puppet theater. But it's a piece of puppet theater that puts the actors, who are also puppeteers, on the spot, because they present the stories by animating the puppets, by singing their voices. And in doing that, they find themselves having to wrestle with what's going to happen to these puppet characters, when they get resettled, if they get resettled, if they get safety. And because I think for me, ultimately, puppet theater is not about the puppets, it's about the relationship between the puppets and the puppeteers, and between the puppets and the audience. And so what I think we're doing in Babylon is we're putting the effect of that relationship on the stage. So I don't know if some of you saw Babylon as a work in progress last spring, but it's a very, very different piece now. So we fight that out. The puppeteers have to really fight this out on stage. Yeah.
I'm always interested in how metaphor begins and how artists get ideas, but what the genesis is. And there were just two examples from tonight. The first, the Blackbirds piece, you said you were in a park and you saw this congregation of birds, and it began. It was the beginning of the idea for the play, and then in the piece about El Salvador, you made this connection between. You saw a parallel between what's happening there and the events in this medieval play, and put it all together. So I just wanted to, if you could say any more about either of those things, or either of those beginnings, or anything else, I'm interested. I don't mean to. I never want to pin an artist down and say how. When did the light go off? But at this, but that is kind of what I want to know too. I mean, if you want to share that, or if you can remember it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think about, or have thought about for a long time, when we first moved here back in the mid-'80s, and we were trying to get some of our work presented by schools, let's say, or do some workshops in schools, and we were constantly coming up against people saying, well, what does the show teach us about geography? What does the show teach us about history? What does the show teach us about, the curriculum and that curriculum? And it would really upset me, because for me, the right question is, what is the show? How does the show help us think metaphorically, right? Because, and it really, I think the light really went off in the late '80s. There was an article in Smithsonian Magazine about a land dispute in Arizona or New Mexico, something like that, and it had to do with cattle grazing and the owners of certain ranches not having enough land to feed their cattle and what they're going to do. And all these people apparently from scientists and government agencies went down there. Nobody could figure out what to do about this. And one of the ranchers was also a poet. And so he created a metaphor that resolved everything for everyone. He created what he called I think he called it a grass bank. And this is really common now in all kinds of areas, this idea. But it's essentially a metaphor, right? He created, and it was a metaphor that became concrete, you know. You could graze your cattle on my land, and you can't pay me for that, but I could get grass bank credits for this that I could trade with somebody else, you know, for use of their land. That's, you know, and so basically the thrust of the article was that it took a poet to figure out something that scientists and government agencies people couldn't resolve. So I think the point of theater, or one of the main points of theater, is for people to be inspired to think metaphorically about the world, because it changes what you see and how you approach problems and how you find solutions. And when I was in Poland in 2007, I think, something like that, and I was in Białystok, which is an eastern part of Poland and had a ghetto. And 50,000 people died in that ghetto, and I'd never been to Białystok before. And I was really struck, kind of, by, you know, I'm walking around and there's some streets named after the ghetto and some ghetto heroes. And I was kind of struck by being there. And then I was walking through this park late at night, and I looked up, and all of these leaves on the trees, dark, big leaves, black leaves. And somebody made a noise, and all of these leaves flew away. And I realized they weren't leaves, of course, they were these birds. And as I stayed there longer and longer, the thing that was obsessing me and this surprising thing that I saw became the same. That I started, you know, where were these birds? And it turned out, and this was the interesting, it turned out that the park that they were in had been, before it was destroyed in the war, a cemetery with a Jewish section in it, right? Why were the birds hanging out in an old Jewish cemetery? And it just became completely clear to me, of course these are their souls. I mean, you know, and I would say this to people, to other puppeteers, and I thought I was out of my mind, right? No, they're birds. You know, they're not birds. I mean, yeah, they're also birds, but, you know, this is other thing, you know, because if they're not the souls of the 50,000 Jews, where are they? Where are those souls? They've got to be here somewhere. Something happened here, right? So if you just start to see the world that way, then everything opens up, you know. Then the rest is craft, right? The rest is just craft. It's how you do it. But it's that metaphorical connection that is it's just a way of looking at things, I think.
It was very effective here, and I think what I saw with, I mean, I'm a real believer that, you know, people have been saying this through the ages. Metaphor is foundational to all human thinking, and I'm not sure you can teach it, but you can put people in places where you can expose them to it, and you know, it comes to them eventually. And that's kind of what you're saying happened to you.
It's a very funny idea, you know, just take a class group to Bialystok and say, find me 50,000 souls of dead Jews, and see what they come up with.
Class trip.
Class trip, yeah, with an assignment. Yeah,
Is this a good time to ask a new question?
sure.
Okay. I loved your, the one about Alzheimer's, that when you came last time, I was here for your speaker series, and you had, was it Flo with you that night?
Florence, yeah.
Florence, you had Florence with you. And I was just curious if you ever hear of anybody still using the time slip stories and.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's grown. Ines can talk about that. I mean, right there, it's blossomed into all kinds of things.
It's well alive. We have created a lot of interest through our own workshops that we have been teaching. So there was people who are interested, and then they go online and they certify, and they get other people interested. So it's, if you're in these circles of groups who are involved in dementia, it's something that's being done more and more.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks to Anne Bastings.
I mean, the 5 things that we saw, the short clips, are so amazingly different and original. And I did notice that the music, in some music was really important, and like the El Salvador one, there was hardly any music. It was all talking. It was all.
Actually, there's a lot of music in that piece.
Is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny because
It
You have to
wasn't in the
listen carefully.
selections that wound up in this editing, but
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
It was just in this edit.
yeah. Yeah, but it's recorded soundtrack as opposed to Babylon, which is singing.
Yeah.
Right.
Was the instruments in the background for Babylon recorded?
In Babylon?
Yeah.
The I mean, there's 2 kinds of music in Babylon. There's the a cappella singing, and there's the recorded soundtrack,
That was what I
which was done by Julian Gersten, a percussionist, and all played by him as well. Music is really important in all of these pieces. Story of the Dog.
It was live.
It was live, right? We had
The orchestra was sitting on the side. It was a mix of our North American musicians and the Cambodian musicians.
Yeah.
So a blending of these 2 traditions.
Yeah. And all of the text was sung in both English and Khmer.
There was nothing recorded in that.
Yeah. So all of these pieces are about music. They couldn't happen without music. It's part of the.
Yeah, that was clear.
Yeah.
Music and puppetry seem to go hand in hand, at least with your style and the style of Bread and Puppet. So they always have some sorts of instruments in the background.
Yeah, they do. It's true. It's true. But I think for me, if there's no music, then I'm hearing the silence. It's still scored. It's still there.
Well, I think at this point then I want to thank you once again, Eric, and for this great talk and for this amazing.
Thank you for letting me try out myself.